It is my opportunity to introduce Mr. Mark Bristow, who I've worked with for many years. And he's had a number of different roles in the government, helping keep this great nation secure. He's going to talk today about putting the E in PACE and helping us communicate when satellite goes down. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Mark Bristow.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, I was like, I didn't hear myself talk, so I was confused. All right. So good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining this talk. Again, I'm Mark Bristow. I'm going to talk about a research and development project that we've been putting together at MITRE that we are actually just about to do our first pilot deployment on, and I'll get into that in a little bit. That really solves a challenge that came out of an exercise that we ran that I actually talked about here on a panel for the first time publicly with Charla, where we talked about an exercise that MITRE ran to basically kind of simulate the end of the world. One of the big challenges we had from that was that no one could communicate. Because we couldn't communicate, we couldn't actually restore operations. We couldn't get the power system back online. A whole bunch of bad things happened. And so one of the things that we did at MITRE was look for a way to actually solve that problem. So that's what put this talk. If you don't know what PACE stands for, by the way, I've realized that that is actually not commonly understood. It's Primary Alternate Contingency Emergency. It's a military planning framework about how you communicate in different types of circumstances. And so, this talk is really about how do we actually deal with that truly exigent circumstances case. So that's the E in PACE. And so we built this technology called Flare. So if you don't know who MITRE is beyond MITRE Tech, because I feel like everyone knows us for MITRE Tech, but they don't know us for anything else. So we actually operate 6 different what are called FFRDCs, federally funded research and development centers for the United States government, looking at a wide variety of things from national security all the way through, we do the Homeland Security FFRDC, healthcare FFRDC, et cetera. So we have actually a pretty wide remit. This is important because one of the things that MITRE is doing right now is helping the Department of War re-engineer the nuclear command and control system. And we actually took some of our insights from our work with nuclear command and control and built them into this. Because as you can imagine, our strategic weapons have to be very, very reliable when it comes to communications. Because if the president makes a decision to launch, we need to make sure that decision actually happens, right? Well, there's a lot of work that goes into actually making that occur. And MITRE is sort of in the middle of how to support that. And we were like, hey, maybe there's lessons learned from that we could actually integrate into a solution that might work for critical infrastructure in a very, very different set of circumstances. So as I mentioned, this is actually born out of an exercise that we talked about here at Critical Effect last year for the first time, where we simulated the end of the world. And so this was an exercise ran in late 2024, where we invited a whole bunch of asset owner operators predominantly to MITRE to run a classified exercise where we basically ran through the tactics, techniques, and procedures that an adversary, specifically China, would potentially use during a Taiwan Strait scenario. And so it was awful. And I'll talk a little bit more about what the exercise actually showed and did. But we came up with a lot of different findings, and I can get more into the exercise if anyone is actually super interested. But some of the challenges that we really came up with were in that phase 4. So the exercise we started in pre-conflict, right? So this was D-30, where we had basically miscreant level attacks going on. We did things like over-odorized natural gas city gates and then caused leak detection alarms to go off, causing panic across entire cities that had no idea how to actually deal with that. We slowed trains down, causing a public health disaster because we couldn't get trash out of cities. We had all kinds of kind of crazy stuff happening at the nuisance level in phase 1 during the exercise. Then we actually got into phase 2. Phase 2 was where the shooting war actually started. And so during phase 2, we actually have actual conflict. We start to see intentional disruption of various critical infrastructure capacities. We start to see outages. We started messing with things like automated generation control by using basically salt typhoon type positioning in the communications infrastructure. Turns out that if you can interrupt the AGC messages, people start to get confused. We start to lose coherence, and we get grid oscillations and that kind of stuff. So we had some of that happen during phase 2. We also made it so that the communications infrastructure went down, like the common one. So, for example, the first thing we did was like take out Teams and take out Zoom. And it turns out that the only people with like good procedures on how to actually deal with that type of scenario is the communications industry. Like they're the only ones who are aware of how brittle their infrastructure actually is. And so when we got into phase 2, everything sort of got hyper localized. We brought in emergency managers, which was a key component of this exercise, because ultimately those local emergency managers start to take command and control of their local regions. We moved into phase 3, where we start to have destructive cyber effects, where we actually start to have intentional denial, degrade, interrupting of communications. We lose our ability to do cohesive consequence management. We started sending operational orders in different directions. So we had like the Defense Production Act telling electric power utility to do one thing. We then had DOE using their FAST Act authorities to actually tell them to do something completely different that were antithetical. And we caused the state of Colorado to secede from the union because they literally just gave up. They're like, never mind, we're going to deal with Colorado. Right, we're not even going to try and like deal with you at the national level, people, because at the end of the day, we have people dying here in Colorado. We don't have natural gas. It happened in the middle of winter with bombogenesis, so it's cold and like people are dying, and so we don't care about these national level concerns, which is like super understandable for Colorado to have that perspective. But like, there's a lot of like, if we're trying to like win a war against China, there's like a lot of important like military assets that either are in Colorado or need Colorado to be working in order to be effective. And so while I get it from like a Colorado emergency management perspective, that might not be the best answer for the country. And so, but one of the challenges is that communications were really spotty. We couldn't actually coordinate effective collective action. So everything kind of, anyone a trained emergency manager in the room besides me? No? So you should all go out and get emergency management training. You've taken the classes. You got your ICS 300. Just muted it, I think, by accident, by the way. Yeah, so most of our emergency management paradigms are based around natural disasters, right? And so we're very, very used to like, hey, if a hurricane's coming through Florida, right? And I'm a power utility in California, I have no problem sending my bucket trucks to Florida because I'm not at risk, right? Well, one of the challenges here is that when the hurricane is everywhere, everyone's under equal risk. Even if you have those assets and you can figure out that somebody else needs them, you are more hesitant to actually release those assets to somebody else because you have that same problem. And so our inability to communicate, coordinate really caused a lot of frustration in the entire system. Importantly, though, I hate it when I used to work at CISA, and NPPD back in the day, and I've been through more government-run exercises than I ever care to remember. And that's sort of where the movie always ends in these exercises, is like the world ended. Okay, everyone go home, right? Well, there's a really important phase here that we always forget, and that's actually how do we like get back to normal? right? Like, how do we actually restore? Because there's dealing with the crisis, and then there's the coordination necessary to actually recover your environment, right? And so we ran the exercise to D plus 45. So 45 days after the shooting started is when the exercise ended. We picked D plus 45 sort of arbitrarily for two key reasons. Number one, personally, Mark's personal opinion, because at the time there was no way to actually model this. I suspect it will take us way longer than 45 days to do systemic restoration of critical infrastructure resources across the country. It might come up in pockets. We might have islands. We may have resiliency zones if we can actually make those a thing, right? But at the end of the day, recovery is going to be inconsistent, and it will take probably months on end in order to get systemic restoration. Right. So that was one of the things we were trying to push against. The other thing is that most organizations had no plan. Their continuity plan is like they're looking for a 3-day type exercise. If they had one, it was 30 days. Right. And so we wanted to push past that 30-day time horizon to kind of stress the system of like, no, like, the electric power system is not going to be fully restored in 30 days in this type of scenario. Like we've never had a complete grid collapse in the United States. And so like, we actually don't really know what it would take to get that back online. I know we have Black Start like plans, but people are too afraid to actually exercise those plans because they're not sure that the grid will actually come back up. The other issue that we had was communications. In the communications domain, basically the comms people that participate in the exercise, and we're talking the AT&Ts, the Verizons, the Lumens, like, the big communications carriers, told us that they are not certain they could ever get it back. That literally, and if you have Sol Typhoon level positioning in our core infrastructure, and the Chinese decide to basically torch that infrastructure, so much of the core infrastructure is bespokely created, artisanally crafted routing infrastructure, that they're not confident they will ever get the system back. They will have to basically rebuild the system from scratch. So if you think your comms are coming back up in, 10 or 15 days, I got another, like the people who run these systems are like, absolutely not, right? That is not what we are going to experience, right? And so when it comes to the recovery phase of this, if you can't communicate, you can't coordinate, you're not going to get things back up. We are unable to restart the power grid. You can't restart a power grid without, basically wide scale load and generation balancing and having the right transmission equipment in between. That requires a lot of coordination over distance. We had no way to do any of that because there was no comms. And so what the exercise was trying to push on was like, where do we have these self-licking ice cream cones of doom where I've got a codependency on another infrastructure sector that's also codependent on me, and neither of us can start without each other. And so we just spiral into the ground. So that was fun to do. So I already kind of walked through a couple of these observations, but a few things to just kind of put. And I think actually downstairs was a good conversation. A lot of head nodding about where the threat is. I think one of the important things about the exercise we ran was we did not have cyber people in the exercise. I mean, we had some, right? But like we had like one of the pipeline operators brought a natural gas shift supervisor to the exercise, right? Couldn't spell cyber if you spotted in the C and the Y. Actually, he was a really great guy, being a little pedantic here. But like, he didn't believe that this could happen. He didn't believe that this could happen, right? He walked out of the exercise and was just like floored. He actually went home and changed some of his communications procedures on the flight home because of what he saw like was a risk that they just weren't considering, right? So, but like John Q. Public, and this community is not John Q. Public in a sense, has not hit the I believe button that this is a problem still. Despite, and I was responsible for some of this in government, government partners here in the room, the government feels like they're shouting this from the rooftops as loud as they possibly can, but the people in Poughkeepsie still don't care, right? So that's one of the big issues. We also found out that like without this coordination mechanism, like you can't actually, and we've never really operated in a resource constrained environment. Like we all expect our Amazon packages to arrive in 2 days. And when they arrive in 3 days, we are in an uproar and trying to find out a phone number to call at Amazon, which if you ever find it, give it to me. I won't share it with anybody else. I don't know how to actually talk to Amazon, but like we've never actually had to deal with scarcity. And when you have scarcity, you have to start to prioritize, right? Turns out No one's got prioritization scheme in this. Turns out that there's really important Department of War facilities that they need to fight a war against China that they haven't told their electric power providers exist. It just looks like an office building. Well, if you are presenting a shift supervisor the choice of powering an office building, they don't understand why it's important, or powering a hospital, they're going to pick the hospital every single time. Right? We haven't actually planned for these wide scale issues because, again, all of our dress rehearsals are hurricanes and tornadoes, which are awful, and flooding, which is awful, right? But purposeful disruption is just requires a different perspective. The last thing I'll touch on that's a sort of an exercise outcome is the last one, which is workforce preparedness. So it turns out most organizations didn't have a contingency plan. Some of them did have a contingency plan that lasted 30 days. Only one asset owner operator out of the entire 70 organizations that we worked with had a contingency plan that included workforce relocation for them and their families, plus food, water, safety, security. One out of 7. If you are a new parent and you have a screaming baby at home and it's been 3 weeks since that baby has been fed well, you are probably not going to come to work. And if you do show up to work, you are probably going to be distracted about your newborn, the care and feeding of your newborn, right? This is something that we don't like to talk about because it's like kind of uncomfortable, but this is what the reality looks like. Right. My wife, it drives her crazy because I love watching like disaster TV shows and that kind of stuff. Right. And it's like, this is actually where the problem is, right? Is that even if we believe that we have the technical capacity to do a recovery, which we don't, we probably don't have the human capital necessary in order to do it. Right. Unless we have a plan for that workforce. Right. And so that is another kind of piece that really no one, except for one company, but it was a 30-day plan. So I gave them like half, 3/4 credit. They had a plan. They basically bought a whole bunch of excess FEMA trailers and like parked them in the middle of nowhere and put them in a big gated area and stockpiled MREs. And that was their way of solving that problem, which is actually better than literally everybody else. All right. So if you want to read more about any of this, we've released a couple of papers about this, the high level, like what did we find, all that kind of fun stuff. These are all publicly available on the MITRE website. The slides will come out, I think, I believe. So if not, take a quick picture of the links, which is not a very effective way of sharing links, but I don't believe in QR codes. So I know too many people who play too many games with the QR codes. So those are the links out to the different things you can read up on. Because this talk isn't really about the exercise. It's about what we did last year to do something about it. So as part of this exercise, communications ended up being like a absolutely critical underpinning problem, right? And when you have the core telecommunications infrastructure completely fail on you, like what do you do? Right. It turns out, and this is again from the telcos. If Don and I were sitting in the same room, we're like 8 feet from each other ish, right? If Don's got Verizon and I got a Verizon phone, turns out on 4G we could complete a call without the core infrastructure working because like the tower does all the work. But on 5G, and God knows what will happen with 6G, completely AI integrated nonsense. We can't actually complete this call without a data center that's doing that has a call broker in order to make that work, even though we're both sitting on the same cell tower, right? This is not communications resiliency. It's more efficient, but it doesn't actually give us the comms we need, right? And so we're in a comms constrained environment. We're host. What do we do? How do we communicate? How do we coordinate, right? Also turns out that today, right now, we do not have a common operating picture about what critical infrastructure looks like. We work with, so MITRE does most of our work with the government, but we also work with some private utilities and like some of the multinational conglomerates that we work with on a day-to-day basis can't tell me quickly what the status of all of their generation facilities, transmission facilities, pipelines, et cetera. On any given day, they have no idea. They'd have to make 50 phone calls to figure that out. And that's on a blue sky day. So when things are really in trouble, and you need to lock in a black start cranking path in order to get the power grid back online, you have no idea if you don't have those comps, right? And so we needed to solve a problem that would not only help solve a blue sky problem, but give us the ability to actually communicate and coordinate during a disaster. So that brings us to Flare. So Flare is a device and sort of a network. I'll get into that in a second. that MITRE has been developing with a couple of different partners. That's a low-cost multimodal device that gives basic status information of critical infrastructure nodes. So it's lizard brain. Hey, I'm alive. Hey, I'm dead. Hey, I could be alive, but I don't have X. Give me X and I can come back online, or I can only come back up to 20%, right? This is the type of information you need to do decision making when it comes to actually doing wide-scale restoration of services. It is designed, again, using our nuclear command and control humans that do this for the military. We basically just turn nuclear command and control upside down. Nuclear command and control is like one command goes out, and then we don't really care about that anymore. Now we actually care more about lots of statuses coming into control nodes that we can then make collective decisions on. Right. And so Flare is designed to solve that particular problem set using some of those resilient communications technologies. And it actually doesn't use one tech. It's actually multimodal, but we use RF as our base tech because RF doesn't require anything else to work. And I can run RF on, solar panels if I have to. Right. And so that's what Flare is sort of designed to do. So we actually realized before we actually did the exercise that this was going to be a problem. I mean, we ran the exercise and it was more horrific than we anticipated. But at the end of the day, like we knew during the planning that like this was going to be a key underpinning challenge. And so we actually started ideating on Flare before the exercise actually ran. Last year was a rough year to be in a government adjacent position. The government made a lot of changes, or in government as well. Government made a lot of changes in priorities. And, like MITRE, we lost like 25% of our workforce. It wasn't the best year at MITRE, but we still invested in this technology last year. I talked to our new CEO about it, and he's like, no, this is important because this is something that can actually ultimately save lives at the end of the day. And like, we need to keep pushing this forward. So even in a rough year, we still were pushing forward this technology so that we could actually develop the protocols and that kind of stuff to make it work. At the tail end of last year, we ran a smaller exercise where we just basically played out on the East Coast, just trying to restore the power grid. So one of our great partners for the exercise was PJM. They run part of the Eastern Interconnect. They actually sent one of their Black Start people to our exercise, and they were like in charge of the Black Start and said, could I restore power systemically? Could I get the power market back online using nothing but the communications that we had built into the Flare devices? And the answer was yes. We were ultimately able to get the necessary generation status, transmission status, load status to actually lock in Black Start cranking pass and actually get systemic restoration using nothing but this lizard brain level of communications. So not only does it work technically, it can actually accomplish a task. Now, it's useful in lots of other contexts, but like one task we wanted to do. So we were able to actually kind of run what we call a SIMX at MITRE, where we emulated a whole bunch of nodes and actually made that happen. So what's the device actually do, right? Again, it's just an RF device. It has a giant battery. In fact, we're working with, MITRE doesn't make products. It's like not what MITRE does. We do R&D. And so we were actually working with two different companies that might take this device and turn it into a real product that you could buy someday. The prototypes were like targeting like a $500 price point. So these things are like not all that expensive. And quite frankly, most of it's battery in cost, right? But what these devices can do is they've got a little e-ink screen on it, like your Kindle has. It's got a little keyboard on it. So you can like type in status messages and be like, hey, I'm alive, or hey, I'm dead, and send that out over RF. And it'll last for like at least 30 days of battery with just the battery, right? You add solar in, and this thing can basically last forever, right? There's other devices that we now have red, white, and blue, American 250. But we have red nodes, which are command and control nodes, which like aggregate all of that data together so we can do collective decision making. And where the real magic was actually of Flare is actually in the way that it does communications, right? So multimodal. If the internet is on, it'll use the internet. If the internet is not trustworthy, it'll use RF, or it'll use Satcom to the extent that Satcom will still exist in this scenario, which is dicey, right? Hence the name of the talk, right? But it gives you a basic ability to give just a little bit of status. I'll tell you, when we first talked to PJM about this, they're like, yeah, we want to do like whenever they have an emergency, they do an all call over their private network. And they're like, could we like replicate that phone call? No. We are not at cat video bandwidth here, people. We are at a couple of K. We can send flat files, right? But like, we're not talking cat videos, but just that status information can be enough, right? We're talking about industrial facilities, right? With RF interference, right? So these things build their own mesh networks and they figure out who they can talk to, and then they figure out how they can get the messages out. They can broadcast to everyone. They can focus it down to a particular unit. But the way that we had designed this is basically you put some of these flare devices on something high, and then maybe you have a couple of sensor nodes throughout your power plant that give you the basic status of how your generator is functioning, your turbine's going okay. And then you can send that off to your local control center, and then ultimately, eventually bubble it up to like state and local government facilities. So this gives you day-to-day awareness on systems that you might not have normally. But in that contingency scenario, now you have an ability to say like, hey, is that line safe? Right. And, as I mentioned, we were actually able to run it through a scenario where we actually used it to restart or simulate and restart the power system and get enough information to actually get that done. The second piece of Flare is in the red nodes. We have the common operating picture. So one of the big things from this is we vibe coded this common operating picture. It's not really production ready software. We just needed a user interface for people to use it. We're actually already working with Esri to like get this as ArcGIS because everyone wanted Esri to be there to be the UI. But with basically a Flare device and a laptop, which both can be run on pretty low power, you can do command and control of your entire fleet in these types of exiting comms out scenarios. It also has the ability for roll-up, right? So if you have this at critical infrastructure nodes, it basically builds a network. State and local government can make decisions at their level. You can get that up to the federal level. And so it has the ability to kind of provide that status information all the way up the chain if you desire to. So we use tiered cryptography in order to make it so you don't have to share everything with the feds all the time if you're not interested. But it does give you the ability to kind of run that nodal network. Wow, that looks really weird. So what's happening next? So as I mentioned, this is they're a prototype. There are 10 in existence today. Okay, so it's not like you can't go buy Flare yet. We are working to get it productized, but we're about to start rolling out some field tests because we done a lot of bench tests on Flare to actually see how it behaves out in the real world and make sure that we can actually execute these types of critical infrastructure status messaging tests and collective decision making using the devices. So we're hoping to do we're working with a utility. We're going to do that probably in the next 2 months, and then hopefully be able to start rolling it out to critical infrastructure providers. That's it. Any questions?
Hey Mark, Flare is a better name than CIRIDAP, but it is a
Yes.
worse name than Doomba. So you got to work on that. But
Yeah.
Curious from when you're talking like PJM, like the ISOs and RTOs, how many of these did they want or think they needed?
So PJM at the exercise was like, I want at least 5,000.
Yeah.
Just for our Black Star Path stuff. And actually, that was a problem for us because when we originally envisioned Flare, we thought of it as only a black sky scenario. And we thought maybe there would be 1,000 or two in existence ever. And in talking to other asset owner operators, they're on similar scale, like 10,000 for one large utility, right? And so hence why we MITRE went out to the private sector to say like, hey, who wants to build these? Made in America, please. So that like this is a product that people could actually purchase at a scale that's something that MITRE's never going to approach.
Is it still Raspberry Pi in the
The
center?
prototypes are, yeah, but
Oh, okay.
the final designs are engineered hardware. So.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, I take a made in the UK Raspberry Pi. Did they give you like a cost measure for like how many of these things you need to build to make it cost effective? So if you did want to build like 5,000, like is that enough for the product manufacturer to go, yeah, sure?
So we haven't like inked the deal with them yet. So we're still in, so that they are starting to evaluate that. I will say, I'm not going to name the partner, but they're a patriotic company. Like they don't want to lose money, but they also are sort of okay with thin margins on this type of stuff because they've kind of bought into the need for this technology to exist. They're one that we're talking to. We are looking for other people to like kind of help build their business case so that we can accelerate the development of this.
Yeah, like a shared order.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to harass you offline too, Mark, but one quick, so hardware supply chain or whatever, one issue. The other issue on the comms supply chain side of things, like, okay, Satcom gone, cellular gone, internet gone, RF, yes. However, for the scale, distance-wise and everything, I mean, we're probably talking HF at this point, which no one really does anymore if you're trying to coordinate this across any sort of large scale
Not
base.
no one.
What's that?
Not no one. We are very intimately familiar with some HF networks that
Okay.
will
All right.
make
So
it go.
that part of the infrastructure side as well, because between antennas, receivers and stuff, like a lot of that is commercially just gone away. So that's also building into, okay, just curious.
Yeah. So again, multimodal, right? So there's the core design uses LoRaWAN as its localized communication, which is up to 6 miles ish, and then HF for the long shots. And actually, part of the magic is our comms people basically figuring out how to like declutter the network when you have limited HF long links. But we've designed the system. There's no infrastructure. It's all mesh. It all meshes itself out, but it's designed so that it can run on just a few long haul links or those hop, skip, and a jump paths. And so part of the challenge is that like if you drop one of these every couple of miles, right? How long would it take to make that chain? You can do that both ways with long shot and with the more short range communications modalities. But we've thought of this exact problem already, and the smart comms guys, and I'm not a smart comms guy, have already figured all this out. We haven't actually tested it all the way across the country yet. We're doing that this. Oh yeah. We tested it from Massachusetts to DC. That's true.
Here's a
Yeah. Well, there we go.
All right.